Can you put in, can you mute? It's mute. Oh, your phone. Good afternoon, everybody. Still making it. Welcome to the Bixby Center Postdoctoral Scholar Research presentation. My name is Ndola Prata, and I am the faculty director for the Bixby Center. I will first would like to acknowledge that the Bixby Center recognizes that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. So consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. So for today, it's my pleasure to introduce the postdoctoral student, Dr. Meg Brown. She's a scholar through a joint partnership between the UC Berkeley Bixby Center and the organization Pathfinder International. And in this role, her applied research focuses on women-led climate resilience programming, examining the connections between reproductive health, gender equity, and climate resilience. And the goal of the project is to generate pathways to more effective programming and policies. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Meg Brown. And Meg, you will be managing your slides, and we can leave questions for the end, if possible. But if there are some clarifying questions that are important during the presentation, if you could let me know or put in the chat so that I can flag that to Meg. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ndola, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I am so excited to have the opportunity to introduce all of you to the Climate Resilience Innovation Lab, and then, like Ndola said, hopefully have some time for discussion and Q&A with all of you afterwards. The Innovation Lab, which we at Pathfinder have affectionately been calling CRIL, is an initiative that we have been piloting over the past several months. And it's really my hope that this conversation today will introduce you to not only what we did and what we learned from it, but will also spark some creative ideas for you around how research skills and evidence can be applied to tackle tough challenges. So this conversation is going to focus a little bit less on some of our specific results, although we'll get into that a bit, and more overall on our process and our model. So, as a postdoc at the Bixby Center, I have been working very closely with Pathfinder, including on CRIL, and I want to take a moment to introduce you to Pathfinder for those of you who aren't familiar with the organization. So Pathfinder is a global health organization who envisions a world where everyone, even in the most challenging environments, has what they need to be healthy, to thrive, and to live the life that they choose. Local partnerships are really at the center of Pathfinder's work to strengthen health systems and create resilient pathways to sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. One interesting and unique thing about Pathfinder is their use of a country-led model with programmatic leadership and decision-making taking place in the countries where the work is happening. And part of that, country-led and community-focused approach really means that meeting the needs of communities where Pathfinder is working also means really paying attention to emerging challenges that communities are facing, including climate change. So if you would like to get into the details of how climate change is connected to gender and health, including sexual and reproductive health, I really encourage you to take a look at Pathfinder's Solutions Guide for Climate Change, Gender, and Health. And I will drop a link to that in the chat at the end of this session. But to just provide a really high-level overview of some of the connections between climate change and reproductive health, these are things that we see both in the literature and also things that Pathfinder staff are seeing on the ground in programming, right? We see these direct effects as a result of exposure to different types of climate-related hazards. But then we also see cascading effects on people's health and well-beings through pathways that include, damage to health facilities and strain on health systems, damage to crops and infrastructure for economic livelihoods, poor access to poor water quality. All of this has additional effects on people's ability to access sexual and reproductive health care, their own health outcomes. And then combined, right, we see that these shifts can exacerbate existing inequities and really be a barrier to the types of progress that we envisioned and the progress that we have made to date in these areas. So with these ideas, right, these are very complex and highly interrelated issues. They are also deeply contextually specific. Each community faces different climate hazards, and the risks that they experience are going to be closely related not only to the types of hazards that they're experiencing, but also the existing health, social, and economic systems that they exist within, right, including both pre-existing risks as well as communities' assets and resources available for responding and adapting to those risks as they emerge. But despite these very relevant and very important challenges, it can still be really difficult for people to get engaged on climate, even if it is something that they already think is important and they want to get engaged in it. And there are a few big barriers to getting engaged on climate, right? So one of the first hurdles is knowledge. And for many people without a background in climate or environmental sciences, including, for example, people with a background in the health sector, feeling like they don't have the necessary level of knowledge or expertise in order to even begin on these issues is a really big barrier to joining into these conversations. Then the second hurdle that we see is something more like scope or entanglement of these issues, right? So as we start to learn more about what climate change is and how it's affecting us and how it might affect us in the future, we also really quickly start to see that if we want to address the effects of climate change on our health and on our well-being, then we also have to really contend with a range of other issues that drive, intersect with, and are exacerbated by climate change, right? Things like racism, poverty, colonialism and colonial legacies, gender inequity, structural violence, livelihoods, grief, mental health. All of these pieces are deeply connected with the climate issues. Climate is not really, in terms of the effects that it has on us, right? It's not just about the weather outside. Climate change is also a lens that magnifies all that we have left unaddressed. And we have to balance that complexity with the fact that no one person and no one group can do everything at once. And then the third hurdle that we see is reimagining our approach. Doing this work effectively also means contending with the inequities and injustices and really extractive ways of working that got us here in the first place. It requires slowing down, building new partnerships, and critically reflecting on what challenges we are recognizing and what strategies we are putting forward to solve them. So in the face of these climate-related risks to sexual and reproductive health, and quite a lot of interest among Pathfinders in terms of getting more engaged in climate resilience work. The Climate Resilience Innovation Lab was created as a way for us to collectively cross these hurdles together and bring the values that were emerging in our climate resilience strategy as an organization to life. Our goal with CRIL was not to turn people into climate experts, and certainly not to do so over the course of just a few sessions. What we were really trying to do here, right, was build country-level capacity and confidence to engage in these types of intersecting challenges, and also to recognize the really valuable skills and experiences that they have to offer to others working on climate change. Their background and their expertise is extremely relevant, and so we wanted to really build people's confidence in what they had to bring to the table. Then we also sorry about that. We also really wanted to make sure that we were building, like identifying those teams' personal purposes and their why, right? Really digging into the specificity around their goals related to work on climate change, and what kinds of focus areas were going to be most important for them as a team, getting into that specificity and that uniqueness within their own purpose and what they would be doing in the future. Then, of course, we also really wanted to develop different potential solutions at the intersection of climate, gender, and health, while simultaneously building people's familiarity with different types of tools and strategies for ideation. So we could better prepare teams overall for the process of climate-related proposals, which are often, from a business development perspective, more open and flexible than some of the more narrow health requests for proposals that teams are a little bit more familiar with. And we also wanted to practice ideation together to demystify the idea of innovation. We often see ideas of resilience and innovation coming up in tandem. And so we wanted to engage in innovation in a way that made it feel much more approachable and like something that people really could do in the future in a way that would enable them to recognize what they were doing that was building resilience or was innovative and different from the work of others. We also wanted to make sure that we were connecting people to resources and tools that already existed, and help plan out what was coming next in terms of understanding the overall landscape in that country and laying the groundwork for future partnerships and other actions that needed to take place as we looked forward. So with all of that said, what actually is CRIL? What we did in this piloted form, we had CRIL as a series of 3 virtual workshops that lasted 2 hours each. We used a platform called Jamboard for this. For those who aren't familiar, Jamboard is hosted by Google, and it is a virtual whiteboard meets slide deck where teams can all collaborate. And we use the sticky notes feature for our collaborative brainstorming exercise. And I will show you an example of what that looks like on the next slide. Overall, we broke this down into these 3 sessions where the first one focused on getting to know each other and connect, building people's familiarity overall with evidence around climate and health risks in the country where they worked, and then building out our shared understanding of a problem tree and their own goals for the future. Within session 2, we moved more into the ideation and solution space. So we brainstormed different solutions together. We worked on developing a vision for a climate resilient future, and we practiced strategies for selecting different types of solutions, ultimately moving towards a unique theory of change for this specific country team. And then in session 3, what we really focused on was bringing that vision to life and creating a plan together by thinking through different categories of areas where they might need to take action in the future, whether that was around knowledge, capacity, or other types of resources that they as a team might need. Most of our sessions in this pilot were led by 2 facilitators, myself and Jessie Roundtree. And these sessions were country focused. So we typically had about 3 to 5 staff members from country teams participating. We did occasionally have an extra guest, whether that was a program officer, maybe a business development officer, or a staff member who is based in another country. But it was primarily focused on these country-based teams. During our first iteration of CRIL, we worked with teams from Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. So these teams met separately, but we ran the sessions approximately concurrently. So we were doing sort of session 1 with each team separately around the same time. And then at the end, we had teams come back together, meet together as a large group, so that way they could connect with each other, share what they had learned, and also reflect on their experiences. And as we developed this program, one thing that was really important to us was being mindful about our colleagues' time. We were asking for 6 hours of their participation plus some time to review. So that can still be quite a lot, especially like even when it is spread over a few weeks. So before and between sessions, what I would do was kind of synthesize some of the content that we were producing. So synthesizing background information that they might need, or the contents of what we had discussed into tangible products for the team to review and discuss. So for example, some of our products included background research, which is a country-focused literature review that looked at climate risks, the climate's impact on health systems and socioeconomic systems, thinking about, adaptive capacity, gender considerations, and the policy context in that country. And then we use the information from that background research to inform the contents of session 1. We also had a solutions research for these teams. So this was an overview of evidence-based solutions that were used in that country, or had demonstrated effectiveness there, or were recommended in the research to be used in that, or things that were recommended or put forward within national strategies as potential solutions to implement in the region. We also included as part of this a list of relevant stakeholders who were taking action, working on projects related to climate change, gender, and health in that country. And then that research was used to inform session 2, our brainstorming session. We also produced a problem tree. So this was the result of our brainstorming exercises that we did together in session 1. And we had a climate action plan as the end product from all of this. And that included some specifics around the country team's aims, their overall goal, and their vision for what a resilient future might look like, some different ideated solutions that they were prioritizing, as well as metrics that could be used for those different solutions. An overview of some of their focus areas and where they wanted to prioritize their efforts in the future, as well as a list of their next steps and needed actions to get them from where they were currently to where they would like to go as a country team. And each of these items was really the product of various exercises that took place across all 3 sessions. We also developed a few tools that were not country specific and were a little bit more generalized. So these included what we're calling our Climate Action Toolbox, which is a list of different types of resources that can be used to learn more about climate and health, or to do ideation in the future. We developed a facilitation guide for this session. We had an active learning record, which was how the facilitators tracked what we were learning and adapting throughout implementation of CRIL across the pilot. And then we also have templates for all of the products that we developed, as well as for all of the sessions. And just to give you an example of what Jamboard looks like, if you have not used it, this is an example of something that we did in session 2 with our Tanzanian team. And in this exercise, we used a prompt called How Might We, which is a brainstorming exercise from IDEO. And we use that to help teams envision different types of strategies that they could use to, ultimately generate a climate resilient health system that enables Tanzanians to be healthy in the face of climate risks. So staff members would put sticky notes onto the screen with their ideas. We would discuss it as a group, and then we asked people to star the ones that felt most important to them. And so we would go ahead and put stars on those, just to see where people's priorities were and what was standing out to them as some of the most important solutions to consider. I think another really important piece of CRIL is not only what we did in a very practical sense in terms of, the contents of the sessions and the overall structure of these workshops, but also the approach that we brought to the sessions. So within this, we really wanted to make sure that we were holding equity, justice, and autonomy at the center of our work, being willing to have really difficult conversations and opening the door to talk about the implications of historic approaches, to talk about the implications of our work today, and what different types of paths forward we might have to choose between. We also really wanted to prioritize a collaborative approach. Everybody has unique experiences and something to offer. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were taking time to pause and connect with each other, and that we were treating each other as partners in reaching shared goals. Overall, CRIL was designed to be highly, highly interactive, and very based on active learning and different types of interactive brainstorming exercises. Overall, we also really encouraged optimism and creativity. Climate change work can become very heavy, very fast. And so we wanted to be both mindful of being realistic about the scope of challenges and the reality of some of these cascading effects of a changing climate, while also maintaining a sense of positivity about future possibilities with really big creative ideas welcome. Within this, we were wanting to build on our areas of expertise in health, but also engage with ideas that bridge sectors and would take a more holistic approach. And as I mentioned earlier, being mindful of the burdens already on staff who were participating was also something that was very important in the overall design of this. So we put a lot of emphasis on connecting team members to resources that already existed, building tools and resources that they could refer to after the sessions ended, and really sharing the burden of the work, sharing the burden of synthesizing all of these materials. The reality is that innovation takes work. It is risky, and we wanted to help share that risk with team members. And finally, we really prioritized active learning and planning for scale-up and future iterations of CRIL. And I want to talk about this one specifically in a little bit more detail with all of you. So as part of our active learning approach here, we used pre and post surveys that included both a more quantitative ranking, self-assessment of people's knowledge, empowerment, their ability to innovate, things like that, as well as a series of open-ended questions that offered participants the chance to give us just a little bit more detail about their experiences and their desires. We also had the country director complete a worksheet before the Innovation Lab kicked off. And that worksheet gave us a little bit more background information about the country team's experience level, their focus areas, their priorities, and their geographies of work. And so between the responses that we got on the pre-CRIL survey, as well as this pre-CRIL worksheet from the country director, we got a lot of information that allowed us to tailor the sessions to each country team and their specific focus areas around different aspects of reproductive health, or the geographies where they were already working or plan to work in the future. Something else that we did was at the end of each session, we used our sticky note brainstorming technique to check in with participants about what went well, what we could do differently, and what questions they still had. Within this, we didn't want to change what was working well, but we did want to be responsive to people's needs and preferences. And we also wanted to normalize and model paying attention to and making note of what is and isn't working, because that's really how innovation happens, right? We wanted to model small forms of innovation and adaptation in real time for these teams. Overall, we were extremely mindful of documenting our learning and the tools that we used, because really the vision for this concept is to train others to be able to facilitate sessions. We saw our role as being able to provide an injection of time, energy, research, and our own facilitation experience. into developing not only these sessions, the sessions themselves and hosting them, but also developing tools that other people could use and adapt. So for example, thinking about, in the future, staff in country being able to lead sessions in person, having regionally based staff members host virtual sessions in time zones that were friendlier for people, or team members hosting similar sessions with stakeholders and implementation partners to brainstorm together. So as part of that, we developed a really detailed facilitation guide, which included information about the session objectives, how to prepare for sessions, different activities that were included in the sessions, including scripts, prompts for discussions, and notes on overall timing. And then after each session, the facilitators would meet to debrief on how the session went, to update our facilitation guide and our Jamboard templates, and then make notes in our active learning record file that documented what went well, what was challenging, what we changed, and any next steps. So what did we learn from all of this? I want to start with what went well. And in terms of outcomes, we saw that overall people's self-assessment scores around their knowledge, confidence, empowerment, ability to innovate, and resources for innovate did improve from before CRIL to after CRIL. Really, the only exceptions that we saw in this was when people had ranked themselves as high as possible before CRIL, and then occasionally you would see somebody who then after CRIL would rank themselves about 1 point lower. So I think that was something that as a team we felt was a signal that people were recognizing what they had learned, but also what they still had left to learn. And I think, one of the other really important pieces here was that we got really useful qualitative responses. This was something that we had debated as a team in terms of inclusion of these qualitative and these open-ended prompts within the survey, because that can be quite burdensome for people to take the time to provide these responses. But ultimately, we received really detailed and thoughtful feedback from our colleagues that enabled us to make sure that the sessions were adapted to meet their needs and also to meet them where they were at in terms of what they knew and their backgrounds. And ultimately, the resources that we've used have been really helpful when it comes to programming and proposal writing and the general familiarity with climate risks and brainstorming strategies. It's easy to see how those teams have continued to transfer and use those skills in other unrelated work or other forms of climate work that we've done subsequently, which is really cool. And I think, overall, some of the strategies that we used that we found were really effective were taking the time to slow down and connect with people and really allow for these rich conversations. We got great engagement from our colleagues who joined us, especially when we called people in by name. So from a facilitation standpoint, that was a really effective technique to make sure that everyone had space to participate in our conversations. We found that having strong buy-in from leadership, including the country director and the country director attending sessions, was really helpful in terms of keeping things moving forward and really anchoring, not only ensuring participation from everyone, but also making sure that what we were developing was in line with that country's strategic vision for the work, because that was important to us too, right? That what was coming out of this wasn't just ideas, but that those ideas were really tethered to work that was already in progress and strategies that were already in place. We were a bit unsure how the virtual sessions would go, but we found that they were effective ultimately. And the virtual sessions also made documentation a lot easier than you would see within traditional design sessions, which typically would use sticky notes on walls. The 2-hour sessions worked well. For some teams, this was a little bit long. I would not recommend going shorter than 90 minutes, because in exercises like this, where it is really creativity heavy and brainstorming heavy, people take a little bit of time to warm up and settle in and get familiar with people. We found that a group size of about 4 to 5 participants worked really well for brainstorming, and also ensured that sessions could still move forward if people had conflicts and were unable to attend at the last minute. And we overall found that the sessions, we had some sessions with 2 facilitators, some sessions with 1, both worked well. But having 2 was especially useful because we had the facilitators participate in activities as a way to seed important issues that sometimes could get left behind. And so it was also just helpful to have multiple perspectives going on in this experience. And, facilitation for 2 hours straight can be really difficult for people. And it can also be really challenging then to retain sort of the nuance of the conversation that you need in order to effectively synthesize the contents that were developed afterwards. So sort of sharing that between 2 people helped alleviate that. Some challenges to consider in similar programming. Time zones were challenging for everyone. It was very early for folks based in the US, and it was at the very end of the workday for our colleagues who were Africa-based. And the unglamorous reality is that it can be challenging to be creative when you are tired. In general, scheduling was challenging because people had other commitments related to proposals and programming. And so, sometimes connectivity could be tricky if people were joining sessions away from their desk. So that's something to be mindful of. I think that's true, frankly, for any type of, virtual meeting. But that was something that we would consider in the future. We heard a lot from teams that they wanted to be able to have these sessions in person. They wanted to be able to connect with facilitators face to face and have that kind of time collaboratively as a group. There was also a real desire for sessions that were oriented around specific themes rather than just country-based. So for example, perhaps a session that was focused on innovations around heat, or sessions that were focused around maternal health outcomes. And then I think overall there was a real desire for more collaboration with other teams, more learning from other projects. As a flag, Jamboard is going to be discontinued, so there is a need for other platforms. And I think ultimately thinking about what comes next, making sure that we have the resources necessary for follow-on work, that we have the facilitation capacity for scaling and iteration, right? This was, not meant to be a one-off thing. And so I think, continuing to make sure that we invest in these teams is a real priority. Overall. And I think also making sure that resources that are developed stay updated in this field that is a relatively fast moving field. But I think one other thing that I want to flag for all of you is thinking about how this CRIL pilot is already being adapted and iterated. How else are we using it? How else are we seeing it show up in our work? We are planning another iteration of CRIL with some other country teams, but some of the other more unexpected ways that we have used it, we have used this format as a model for stakeholder engagement work in some of our youth-focused programming in other regions, which is really cool to see that. That team did those stakeholder engagement workshops using this app called Slido to gather ideas, and had participants submit their ideas on a mobile phone, which is a really cool way of hosting those groups, and using another tech platform to do something similar. We have used the CRIL activities to enhance the exercises that we have in program design sessions. And then we've also done some adaptation and dissemination of different types of tools that we have developed or used in CRIL, like that climate action toolbox, our solutions evaluation rubric, and our climate resilience MEL toolkit. So those have all been really interesting to see, some of these other follow-on products that have sprung out of CRIL. And for the grad students here, I also want to just take a moment to talk about some of the translatable skills that come out in an activity like this. So it's your subject matter expertise matters quite a bit, right? But there are also so many other pieces, right? It's different pedagogical approaches and how you can work with people to learn. thinking about your skills around synthesizing and critiquing very technical research and literature. As you're doing literature reviews, being able to see those gaps in the knowledge and narrowing in on really specific challenges and opportunities that might be relevant to a particular context. Science communication and mixed methods research methodologies are always great. And I will say that theory comes in handy. It is really useful to have that familiarity with different frameworks for making sense of how the world works, right? These systems. And you don't always have to talk about theory in a very technical or esoteric way, but by having those frameworks available to you and being able to translate them, you can also, work with other people to, create alternative ways of thinking about challenges, or to, sort of think through some of the implications of the work and different approaches that are out there. And of course, this would not be me doing my part from CRIL and connecting people to resources if I did not also connect all of you with some of my favorite resources. And I will drop the links to these in the chat. Of course, a plug for Pathfinder Solutions Guide, full disclosure that I did write that, but it is really good if you would like an overview of some of these connections and you would like an introduction to different evidence and solutions that exist at this intersection and different strategies for getting started. If you want to see examples of specific solutions, the Climate Just or Gender Just Climate Solutions directory is a fantastic resource of solutions from all over the world. For those of you who are more research focused and really focused on family planning, the FP Earth Project Library is great. And then, this MEL guide is one of my favorite resources for really stakeholder engaged MEL options out there for more community engagement activities. The Arrow training manual is great. It was designed for Southeast Asia, but really a lot of the exercises are applicable to activities around the world. And then if you're somebody who is really focused on mobilizing resources for innovation, donors, investments in this area, the Y Labs Climate and SRH framework is also great. And they have a lot of really useful tools and frameworks to work through that are helpful even if you are not quite as donor focused. So I will drop those in the chat, but I also wanted to just leave a few moments for all of us at the end to have some questions and conversation about all of this from CRIL.
All right, thank you, Meg. Any questions?
In the chat. I have one, Meg. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I'm wondering if you have an example from one of the country teams of then how they took their learnings and the experience within that 6-hour session, and just a specific example of how they put it into their work, whether it was kind of their strategic planning or programming.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, one example is thinking about some of the proposals that we're working on right now. Within these areas of work, each team had, different things come out that were really important to them. But, focusing, for example, on the role of community health workers and how community health workers could be more prepared to support health in the aftermath of climate-related emergencies, but also could be people who could share climate-related information or provide connections to climate-related resources along the way. And so what we're seeing now is some of those ideas are being written into proposals, which is really, really great. And in addition to that, right, we are not only seeing these ideas then be brought forward, but also we have a much stronger evidence base and justification for why we want to be doing those ideas. And collectively, seeing that people have like a much stronger frame of reference for the policy context and some of the, you know, policies to consider, or, you know, as relevant, or, you know, what stakeholders should be engaged in that process. So I think that part is really cool to see.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
Any questions from the room? Meg, we had initially 7 people.
Great.
Just 1 second. Yes. This one is muted. Yeah.
And Dola, you're muted. I didn't know if you had a question from the room.
No, we don't have we have a question. There's an echo in the room that we are not able to solve. I don't see any questions in the chat. Meg, can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a researcher?
Yeah, like my experience with this project, or my experience more generally?
With this project.
Yeah, so, you know, a big part of what I did was not only, so like doing the literature reviews, right, for each of these countries, thinking about that background research, but then also thinking about, you know, what kinds of evaluation tools we needed, what kinds of learning we were hoping to see, and how we wanted to integrate learning, you know, within that process. So thinking about, you know, what kinds of methodologies were going to work most effectively for, you know, the scope of this project, but also for the teams that we were working with. And then also thinking about, you know, the design of these sessions and how, you know, it was going to be put together as a facilitation guide, you know, thinking about how we were going to construct it and bring all these pieces together. And I think my, you know, perspective on that was really informed by a lot of the research that I was involved in, and in some ways I'm still involved in, with the Center for Global Health Impact and Institute for Leadership Impact at SMU. And they do a lot of sort of similar work around leadership development and adult learning, and all, you know, with a sort of global health focus, thinking about how we can create change with how like small resources can create big change. And so I think there was a lot of influence there too from some of my previous experiences in terms of what these products looked like.
So as a follow-up, you know that there's a lot of discussion about climate literacy. So in this type of sort of an innovation lab, what level of knowledge about climate mitigation interventions are needed for people to fully participate?
Yeah, I think, you know, ultimately, it is really helpful for people to have some familiarity with the key climate risks in the area where they work, and also to have familiarity with the language that's used in the climate space versus some of the language that's used in other spaces. So that way they there aren't as many jargon barriers when it comes to meeting, like having these conversations across sectors. But I think something that is important to me is that, you know, when the work is done collaboratively and in partnership with other people, you know, somebody doesn't need to be a climate expert to be involved or to have something to offer, right? So long as they are working with somebody who does have that needed expertise about these risks. And so I think that part is really important overall. I think people can sometimes feel like they have to know everything, or, you know, fully understand the complexities of, you know, how the environment is changing or might change in order to begin. But I think sometimes knowing your own expertise and your own background, and then, being able to envision how that might fit in to climate related challenges and like build those connections with people with other forms of expertise is just the more important piece there.
Thank you. I have another question, but I'm gonna wait a little bit. Somebody has a question.
For just a few minutes, and Dola, maybe go for it.
Yeah, okay. So my last question, Meg, is related to gender. So how much of the gender lens the participants had in order to come up with innovations?
Yeah,
Something that happened organically, or the facilitators had to sort of probe for that?
it varied a little bit by team, but like some teams were always talking about gender, and some teams it was a little bit less frequent. But it came up organically overall. I think that's not especially surprising, right, given Pathfinder's organizational focus. But that was something that we as facilitators were mindful of in the ideation piece, was putting forward, whether we were ideating solutions or we were thinking through some of the problems and challenges related to climate change in this context, was making sure that we were seeding, gender related challenges or challenges that youth face, right? Thinking about many different aspects of identity that could shape people's risks or shape these challenges. And so it was a little bit of both, I would say. And then when it came to thinking through different types of solutions, what we did after the Jamboard exercise that I showed you earlier, where people were ideating solutions and then putting stars on them, people would choose their top 4. And then we would talk through our solutions evaluation rubric together. And the solutions evaluation rubric included some prompts for thinking about, okay, how does this solution think about gender? How could it consider gender? And so we were thinking through this rubric, not as a way to say that solution will work or that solution won't work, but as a way to say, okay, well, we have this idea. How can we make this idea better? How can we make sure that the things that are really important to us as an organization in terms of our values and our priorities are coming out fully in this solution before we move it forward to the next stage? So there were a couple of different points where we could sort of pull those pieces out a little bit further when needed.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment that you had said that some of the folks were like, oh, it'd be better if the facilitators were in person, but I think it's so cool that you were able to do it in this remote setting because you're working on climate change. So that extra like flying over to those places, and it seems like you were still able to do quite a bit, even with your remote locations. We work with the team in Rwanda, and similarly, like the project's now been going on for I think close to 4 years, and we still haven't been there yet because we could just communicate on Zoom. And I do appreciate those, our early mornings and their late evenings, but I like that you made it work, and it inspired me to think more about kind of even bigger workshops that we could do just using tools right at our, I guess Jamboard's going away, but things we have access to right now.
Yeah, no, there are so many similar pieces, that it's really cool. I think that's one thing that has changed a lot in recent years, is sort of the, ability to do this remote and to engage with people in different ways. And I think, seeing how this tool could work and really create so much good connection. I mean, we did these calls with video off, for example, too, in most cases because of bandwidth challenges. And so to still be able to develop those relationships and still have people feel comfortable enough to engage, in creativity and the vulnerability of brainstorming in a group, and especially in a group with peers, in a group with hierarchies, I think was really cool to see.
Thank you. Girma has a question. Girma,
There's actually
like
2 coming in. I can ask them for it because Indola, the echo is a little tricky with you.
Yeah.
So the first question comment is really useful and efficient approach of engaging multiple actors across multiple sectors. Just curious to know if this approach has helped participants engage in policy dialogue. Forgive me if this has been addressed.
Can you ask the second one
Sure.
already?
And the second one was any data collected in this pilot to measure effectiveness, visualize pilot impact in terms of data visualization.
Yeah, so to the question of, impact in terms of data visualization, we have some of those pieces now. The pilot was relatively small, so I think, we're not going to be able to see anything, like it'll be more meaningful later on after we have done this in a few other countries as well. And I think that sort of thinking about like some of the longer term impact in a more follow-on way also connects to the other question about policy engagement. Some of that will come out over time, but I think, certainly we've seen it in terms of stakeholder engagement with partnerships, and I think, seeing teams be really comfortable working with partners from other sectors. And, within those types of activities, they are also working, with stakeholder engagement, both with community-based organizations, but also with in more government and advocacy related spaces. So I think we will get a better sense of that over time. But I think that, seeing the teams kind of continue to engage in those areas and have that go well and continued sort of interest and momentum in this area is a good signal in terms of progress in that area overall.
And then did you, the second one about the data collected?
Oh yeah, I answered that one first.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Backwards.
Okay. Well, I think we are at time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think can you hear us?
We can. It's much better. I think you fixed the problem.
Thank you. Somebody fixed the
I think I did by
Figure
texting
out the
CT. I
problem.
was like, 2 computers, get rid of one.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Meg, and hope you continue to update us on some of this climate resilience that is very interesting work related to gender and reproductive health. Thank you, everybody, for coming together and participating. And if you want to discuss more these issues or follow up, you can contact us at the Bixby Center and we can have more discussions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.